Protests in Cuba have rocked international headlines for several weeks now. It's said that they began on July 11th, 2021 and have spread all across the Caribbean island into several dozens of cities. Now, the United States has not only welcomed these protests, but encouraged them too. U.S. President Joe Biden not only kept former President Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign on the Caribbean nation, but increased sanctions, saying that this is just the beginning. Several prominent lawmakers in Congress, specifically in the Republican Party, have advocated direct intervention in Cuba, even suggesting airstrikes. Now, Cuba has responded that the entire affair is orchestrated by the United States in order to interfere in Cuba's internal politics. And they point to decades of covert and overt assaults on Cuba. They point to the embargo, and they point to the United States' efforts to malign the Caribbean nation. Several other presidents in the region expressed their support. President Maduro of Venezuela, President Obrador of Mexico, both raised concern that the United States should not be using humanitarian endeavors as a shield or a pretext in order to interfere in Cuba's internal affairs. So what is happening in Cuba? In order to find out, I went to get the other side of the story that you don't hear in corporate and mainstream media. I sat down with the Chargée d'Affaires of the Cuban embassy and permanent mission to the United Nations in Vienna. We talked extensively about these protests, the embargo, and much more. Take a look. I'm Richard Medhurst, and you're watching the Communiqué. Marlen Redondo, the Chargée d'Affaires here at the Cuban Embassy in Vienna. Thanks for taking the time to receive us. I want to talk about what's happening in Cuba. You know, there are a lot of questions that people have. What is happening in Cuba? What are these protests that are taking place there? What's the real size of these protests? Could you tell us more about what the situation actually is there?
First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to your program to do this interview. Because I think this is very important, because there has been a very huge disinformation campaign against Cuba. And the projection of the media on the situation in Cuba has been very far from reality, even here in Vienna and in other medias in Europe. And to answer your first question regarding the real size of the protest and what is going on in Cuba right now, I first of all have to talk about what happened previously. The fact is that previous weeks it was developed a manipulation and communication campaign financed by the US with the objective of inciting, encouraging people to go out to the streets with the objective of encouraging instability in the country. And they took the opportunity, the advantage of the real hard situation that Cuba is living right now due to the pandemic, due to the reinforcement of the blockade, with the application of more than 240 measures during the Trump administration. And they took that advantage to do their campaign. And during those weeks, they were inciting to violence. They were calling for vandalism acts. They were calling for assaulting the officials of Cuba. They were calling also for sabotage. And as a result, on July 11, vandals went out to the streets, announcing death for communists, breaking glass, throwing stones, making acts of vandalism. Of course, there is also known that a group of dissatisfied people also joined these disorders. Dissatisfied because they have been experiencing a very hard situation in Cuba in the recent months due to several causes. Due to the electro-energetic situation that was having problems during those days. Unfortunately, that problem is already solved in Cuba. And a group of accumulated problems, especially as a result of the blockade. Yeah. And unfortunately, the media have took advantage of that. And they have put a reality of Cuba that it is not. They have over-dimensioned and intentionally exaggerated the size of the protest. And I want also to clarify that in Cuba there was not a social outbreak, as someone have been saying, including the media. In Cuba was disturbances, was disorder, and caused by the manipulation game and manipulation campaign of the US government.
And when you say this manipulation campaign, could you maybe give us some more details? Because I recall there was a few years ago the US tried to create a Cuban version of Twitter, which was with this exact goal of subverting the Cuban government and causing social unrest. Is that something similar that happened now?
Well, yes, it's the same game. They have always applied the same rules, the same procedure against Cuba and other countries. They want to create a reality to show the world, a reality that is not like that. And that's the result. They have, you know better than me, that who have the media have the power. And unfortunately, Cuba is a small island and the US is the most powerful country in the world. And they have all the means to manipulate the media.
Do you feel that the media, not just in the United States, but in the Western world in general, so in Europe, even in Austria, do you think that they've been reporting accurately and honestly on what's happening in Cuba?
No, unfortunately not. They have not respected the principle of impartiality that any journalist must have. Because I think they have limited themselves to replicate what other media said about Cuba, without verifying, without contrasting, without even inquiring or I don't know, questioning anything. They have just put the same news that they saw in other media. This is not good. I think, and I don't know if it is a cause of the lack of interest of some media or to the fear of going out the line that have been dictated to them.
I saw in The Guardian, for example, they had a crowd of people protesting, but they were holding the flag of Castro's July 26 movement, and they say it's anti-government.
It's really funny. It's really funny.
And there's even the United Nations, they use a picture of a woman who's in favor of the government. So I wanted to ask about these, like, you know, how far does this go with this image manipulation?
This has been in an unimaginable level. Because they have used false images to say certain things, and after a few days that have been discovered that is a lie. They have used an image of a parade for the 1st of May of Cuba. You see like this, okay? Of course, saying that this was happening in Cuba as the protest. And this is an image of a parade of the 1st of May in Cuba that we do annually. This is one example.
They say this is the slogan
protest,
that they have,
yeah.
Right?
They said that July 11, people went out to the streets, and this is the protest, and this is the 1st of May parade of Cuba. So, yeah. They have also made collage of pictures. This is of pictures of people wounded, even children. And none of them are of Cuba, none of them are Cubans. This is this picture is cut, but well, you can see here people wounded, bleeding, and this is not Cuba.
Well, where are these pictures from? I mean, they.
Yeah, they take it from other protests in Colombia, even.
So,
yeah.
It's not even from the same country at all. It's
No. They made a collage. And they put this on the social media, and they even put banners with these pictures saying that we in Cuba, the officers, were doing this to the population. And
I see this typical hashtag, this SOS Cuba, right? They keep using this the opposition.
SOS Cuba, SOS Cuba Libre, Cuba Free. It's well. And another example you mentioned, the UN. This is
This isn't.
This is unbelievable. The UN took this picture of this person saying that she was protesting, that she was an image of the protests in Cuba. And then they have to eliminate the tweet, because this same woman said, I went out to the street because I want to defend my country. I wanted to defend the revolution. And I cannot understand why my image was taken to say the opposite. This is a fault of misrespect. Yeah. So finally the UN eliminated the tweet. Yeah.
what you're seeing happening right now in Cuba with this image manipulation, with the narratives in the media, do you feel that this is something that we've seen maybe before in Venezuela, in Syria, countries that the United States doesn't like, let's put it that way?
Yeah. I think they have applied the same manual for various countries from the Middle East, from Europe, and also from Latin America. Of course, they want to do an interventionist campaign in order to achieve what they call regime change. And the pattern of lies, if used for to justify a military intervention or for encouraging chaos and disturbances and instability in a country that would lead eventually to a regime change. And that's what they have done in other countries.
When it comes to what they're saying, pushing for regime change, we hear some of the loudest voices in favor of regime change. They're Cubans or Cuban exiles living in Miami. Miami is a very big hotspot for this, and these calls for regime change, increasing sanctions, bombing Cuba, do these opinions represent the majority of Cubans living in Cuba?
No. No. This is not the image of the Cubans abroad. And I thank you very much for this question, because this is very important. I have the opportunity to clarify the people who see this interview. Well, it is true that some radical groups in Miami, especially in Miami, are asking for military interventions and calling for concrete actions against Cuba and saying messages of hate even towards their own relative in Cuba. But this is not the real image that the majority of the people abroad. I think the majority of the people abroad, the Cuban people abroad, love their homeland, love their country. Because I'm not speaking about the ideology. I'm speaking about love to your land, love to your people. And that's what I feel. And this is very important to clarify, because the media have played a very important role here. The media have tried to highlight the manifestation of hate of the Cuban people. But you can also find on internet images, videos, and messages for the other side, for the vast majority of the Cuban people, saying messages of love, strength, and solidarity. And I want to also to recognize, and this is very important, because meanwhile, a part of these radicals were making demonstrations in front of our headquarters, of the Cuban headquarters abroad, diplomatic headquarters, and saying offenses and doing vandalism acts against
I saw in Paris yesterday.
Yeah. A vast majority of the other Cubans were struggling to gather medical supplies to send to Cuba. Yeah, they were doing a lot of efforts trying to send shipments to Cuba with medical supplies, and they achieved that. We have received in Cuba hundreds of shipments of medical supplies thanks to the efforts of these Cubans, of the vast majority of Cubans, with messages of love, strength, solidarity, and unity. And I think that's the image of the Cuban abroad.
When you hear not just Cubans, expatriates or exiles, but politicians, Cuban Americans, like we have Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, they're calling for action, whatever that means. And you had the Miami mayor, actually, Suarez, who was saying that airstrikes should be on the table. I mean, what is your reaction when you hear things like that, that someone, another person, never mind someone who is claiming to be Cuban, is calling to bomb Cuba? What is your reaction to that?
Well, that is difficult. Because I believe that these people you mentioned, this U.S. politician, doesn't feel like Cubans. That's the answer to your question. Because any Cuban who loves its country cannot promote or call for airstrikes against your own land. And those politicians, I believe that they have a very strict line of political interest, economic interest, and also electoral interest. So they call for maintaining the distance between the U.S. and Cuba. They are also against the rebuilding of ties. I think those people are not Cubans. They don't feel like Cuban.
What's more interesting, considering these politicians in the United States, some of them call themselves socialists or progressives, and yet, when they talk about Cuba, they as we say, I think it's called both-siding the issue. So they say, on one hand, yes, the embargo should be lifted on Cuba, and then they also say that the government is anti-democratic, it's brutalizing the Cuban people, so that they repeat the same kind of rhetoric, the same line as the people we were just talking about now previously. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, these politicians.
I believe that those politicians in the U.S. receive a lot of pressure from others. Any politician who wants to express an opinion different from that is the vision of the government receive critics, and it's not well seen in the U.S. And saying something good about Cuba and in the U.S. it has a very high cost for a U.S. politician. That's why I could somehow understand why those politicians have to, on one hand, to criticize the blockade, and on the other hand, to criticize Cuba to make a balance. But, however, I want to recognize and also express my appreciation to those politicians that, in spite of the differences in ideology, have been brave enough as to reject and criticize the policy of sanction against Cuba. That's not an easy action in the U.S., and they have done that.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. Considering the ties between the United States and Cuba, Joe Biden, when he was running for president during his campaign, he said that he would go back to the era of Obama in terms of relations with Cuba. So far, he's failed to do so. Why do you think that is?
Joe Biden has not only maintained the blockade, he has also maintained the reinforcement of the blockade with the 243 measures applied by the Trump administration, and also the 55 measures applied during the time of the pandemic. And he has even applied other sanctions last week against one official of my country and also an entity of my country. And he said that this is just a beginning. So, well, this is, speaking about the reason, this is just hypothetical because I have not all the answers. But in my opinion, I believe that this behavior of Biden is a result of the very strong pressures he has been receiving from representatives of these radical groups of anti-Cubans that have been asking for concrete actions against Cuba and military intervention. And also he has maybe this behavior is due to the the electoral ambitions that Joe Biden has. Towards the Florida state. As
you recalled, he said that this is just the beginning, which, I mean, it sounds like a threat. It's a veiled threat. I mean, do you think that there's any hope the United States will move towards reestablishing ties with Cuba or improving ties in this term at least?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. We have time. The beginning has not been so good. Actually, has been very bad, even worse than Trump administration, because he maintained the same sanctions that Trump's and even put another one. But we have to give the benefits of the doubt to Biden. Maybe in a few months the policy change. But right now I have not hope. Right now I have no hope because the situation has been very bad.
Speaking of the situation, Cuba is the only country in Central and Latin America who's actually been able to develop its own COVID-19 vaccine. However, as we've seen because of the embargo, there have been ventilator shortages, syringe shortages. There's all kinds of medical equipment that Cuba's unable to access from abroad. How much has this embargo worsened the situation, even though Cuba has made huge leaps and even sent doctors to other countries to fight this?
I have to start saying that not a single family in Cuba has not been affected by the blockade. Everyone has been affected because the blockade affects every dimension of the Cuban economy and society. And you have mentioned in your question the problems, the difficulties that Cuba has in getting supplies, medical supplies during the pandemic, and this has been as a result of the blockade. And I think that the most painful dimension of the blockade is the impact on the health situation, on the health system in Cuba. And another example of the health system and of the impact of these sanctions is that we in Cuba are deprived from acquiring some medicines only produced in the US for the treatment of cancer, for example. Yes. And this is very painful for the Cuban people, and this is very alarming also.
If we're clear that the embargo and the various other measures that the United States and its allies have taken against Cuba, they do affect the situation economically, socially. I mean, how do you respond to people who try to frame the entire situation, like all these problems, as just the government's fault? You know, they say, oh, this is socialism and it's the government's fault, and as you mentioned, they say the embargo has nothing to do with this. I mean, what would you respond to these people?
Well, first of all, I have also to recognize that the government of Cuba is not perfect. We have, the government has its defects, its deficiencies, any other government of the world has. And we are trying to resolve those problems. Even the president of the Republic of Cuba have expressed it in several times, that we have deficiencies and we have to solve it. And we are in the middle of the process of updating our system, our economic and social system, especially in order to try to solve our problems. But I can assure you that the biggest obstacle that the development of our economy has is the blockade, is the effect of the blockade. And also, if the solution to our problems depending on the internal decision, I believe that a long time ago the people of Cuba would be living in much better conditions than they do right now. And unfortunately, the solution does not depend on the willingness of the government of Cuba, but on the willingness of the government of the U.S.
We see that Cuba sends doctors to a lot of countries. The United States sends soldiers to other countries, as we just talked about. They occupy other countries around the world. Where does this difference in ideology come from? Why is it that Cuba is sending missions of doctors to help other countries, and the United States sends Marines? I mean, where does this come from?
Our national hero, Jose Marti, you must have known about it. He used to say a phrase, a very known phrase in Cuba. He said that men, the human, divided into two kinds: those who love and found, and those who hate and destroy. And I think that the main difference between U.S. government and Cuba is principles. The Cuban Revolution is based on the principle of solidarity, while the government of the U.S. With neoliberal imperialism moves by interest, economic, political, and geostrategic interest, and it has no limits. It has been proved with the dropping of the nuclear bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also in the multiple wars and conflicts that they have been created and financed, and which they have took benefits from.
What is the worst lie you've seen? And I know this is a big question because there's a lot, but what is the biggest piece of misinformation or mistruth or blatant lie that you've heard about Cuba, whether it's in the media or on social media?
I would like to refer to the two biggest lies I have seen. The first one is of the missed people, the disappears. Yeah. They have even circulated a list of hundreds of disappears in Cuba, and it has been proved by the government that those people are not disappeared. They even included an official, people who work in the cinema production in Cuba, and this person, when he saw his name, he said, "Well, I'm disappeared. This is unbelievable," and this is completely out of order. This is not real. In Cuba, there is not a single people missed. And the other thing was they were saying, especially in the social media, that in Cuba the government took in prison children. Yeah, this is completely also false. We have a priority to take care of children. We don't take children in prison and during the protest. This is completely wrong. And yes, there are other lies, but this is the two shocking one. Yeah. Yeah.
Marlen Redondo, thank you so much for your time, and my congratulations also for your holiday yesterday, so for Cuba's revolution, and I'm very grateful for your time, for receiving us here. Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. It has been a huge pleasure, and thank you so much for trying to get the truth about Cuba. This is not common, and I have to congratulate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.